Well, hello, class, and I want to welcome you to the beginning of a new section. So, the first chapters 1, 2, and 3 were kind of more introduction to what we're going to be talking about throughout the semester. And so, for the next several chapters, 4 through 7, we're going to be looking at the hiring process overall. From the moment somebody applies for a job to the moment that they're hired. So, and specifically for this week's section, we're looking at chapter 4, which is all about recruitment. So again, this is, more on a legal class, obviously, more on employment law. So, there's a million different things that we could talk about as it relates to the recruitment process, about the creativity of how you market a job, how the different ads that you can do, the different internet creative ways to get your job out there. I love this stuff and I could spend forever on it. However, I just, for the purposes of this chapter, again, very important chapter, but at the same time, in the big picture, especially as we get to like the exams and some of the other things that we're going to be doing. Just a couple of main points that I want to draw your attention to in chapter 4 specifically. So, really kind of three main topics that I really want you to look at for this week. And again, I could go into a lot more detail, and your book goes into a lot more detail, in this chapter. But again, if you can remember these three things in chapter 4, you really know what I want you to know. First thing is about, when we talk about, the types of language that we use when we're advertising our jobs. The one thing that I think is so important is we need to look at kind of neutral messages that welcome all applicants. Where employers get into legal trouble is when the language that is used in job ads or job descriptions, job placements, whatever you want to call them, tend to maybe, even if it's not done intentionally, indirectly favor one group or another. And I'll give you a prime example. When early in my career, when I was working in a different industry, I remember reading this job description that we had posted, and we had about 25 applicants, and of those 25 applicants, only one of them was a woman. There were 24 men and one woman, and given the demographics, that shouldn't have happened. It was very strange. So I remember we went back and looked at it, and the job description used what we'll call gendered language. It was all he will do this, and him, and he shall do this, and and there wasn't there wasn't a lot of neutral language. There wasn't, from welcoming for both men and women, for example. So when we changed that language, all of a sudden we had a tremendous upsurge in female applicants because, again, we discovered that we were using language that wasn't inclusive. It wasn't neutral. It was not, it seemed to be welcoming all different types of applicants, based on different, religions, ethnicities, color, age, gender, you name it, all the protected characteristics we talked about last chapter. That's the type of job ads and messages in our recruitment we want to be doing, is welcoming people from all different backgrounds. And you'll notice in a lot of jobs, you'll see, companies put, we welcome applicants from diverse backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really good that companies and organizations do that because we want to get as diverse an applicant pool as we can. But where companies and organizations can get in legal trouble is using that type of language that can indirectly lead to one group being favored over another group. So make sure you pay careful attention to what happens if we don't have kind of those neutral messages that welcome all different types of applicants. So that's one thing I want you to know for chapter 4. The second thing is there's a great discussion about the OFCCP and an AAP, lots of letters, but the AAP, Affirmative Action Plan, a lot of organizations, especially, government agencies, or basically anybody that does kind of, direct business with the government, is required to have an affirmative action plan. And this is basically a statistical analysis that companies and organizations develop to kind of take the temperature of their applicants and their promotions and see, are we creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive work environment? It's really what we're trying to do. And under an affirmative action plan, like I said, I work full-time at St. Louis University, and I'm directly in charge of my university's affirmative action plan. We're actually about to finish it right now, and when we do, it'll be about 350 pages long. So if you can't sleep at night, just let me know. I'll send you our affirmative action plan. It'll put you right to sleep. So, but again, it's mostly the vast majority of that are just numbers and showing different trends over the last several years about how departments are doing with their recruitment numbers. we really kind of want to look at three things under an affirmative action plan. Is it looks at underutilization. So, do we have fewer women in our workforce than we should based on kind of the metro that we live in? Do we have fewer individuals with disabilities, Vietnam veterans, different ethnicities, African American, Asian American, Hispanic American? The whole idea is to look at these areas where we have underutilization and try to bring those numbers up to try to make it more equitable and diverse, kind of based on our, our demographics and kind of, in the part of the country that we live in. Again, being here in St. Louis myself, St. Louis is a very, very diverse and huge areas for underutilization to creep up if they're not properly managed. So that's something that I focus very heavily on, is how can we increase the underutilization of different applicant groups. And then kind of the second part is we look at placement goals. Okay, so if we have a department that's only hired men for the last several years, what can we do to try to set some goals to hire more women or to promote more women in these roles once they're hired? So the AAPs look at different placement goals, and we can help departments try to figure out what recruitment efforts can we do, how can we help with the language, what different interview techniques can we do to try to get people from more diverse backgrounds. And then finally, the government, doesn't require us to, necessarily have to hit certain goals, so to speak, or we get fined or in trouble. We have to make good faith efforts. And so we have to show that all the things that we're doing are done in good faith with the genuine desire to create, to try to get rid of underutilization as best we can. So we don't have to have a perfect track record with it, but we have to show good faith efforts. So remember those three key terms when we're talking about AAP is underutilization, placement goals, and good faith efforts. And the organization, the government agency that oversees AAPs is the OFCCP, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. I don't expect you to know what all those words mean, but just know that the OFCCP is the government agency that oversees our AAPs. Now, again, they have a lot of broad powers. So if we have an affirmative action plan and we, just kind of brush it aside, or we don't make active efforts to help our underutilization or to try to solve placement goals, if we don't put forward that good faith effort, essentially, the OFCCP has the right to come in and fine us or, create things that we have to do legally to be able to keep our government contracts. So make sure you have a basic understanding of what the OFCCP does. And again, it's in chapter 4 of your textbook. And finally, the third thing I want you to know for this chapter is, there's a good section in the chapter about applicants in general, and what we look at, what is an applicant, what is not an applicant, how do companies look at certain things, how to determine, has somebody been treated fairly, et cetera, et cetera. Really with applicants, the main thing that I want you to know and take away from the chapter is we need to treat applicants consistently and fairly. So what we don't want to do is, let's say we're interviewing for a new position, and we do 6 interviews, for example. If we want to be fair and consistent with all 6 of those interviews, we don't want to, for example, have 3 of them do an interview, do a group presentation, have a phone screening, and then fly into town and to do all this. Whereas the other 2 who are equally qualified will just do a phone interview and then make a decision there. We want to treat each one of them and as best we can have each of them complete the same steps in the process. If a phone screening is required for one, it should be required for everybody. Then that's not to say you can't have a first round cut and a second round cut and things along those lines. Those are all perfectly fine. But again, with each step in an interview process, when applicants are treated differently or when they're subjected to different questions or different types of things, that's where we can get into trouble. Now, of course, with every applicant, you can ask unique questions based on their own unique resume, things like that. But with every interview, you should have a basic set of questions that you ask of everybody, about their knowledge of the company, about, diversity, equity, inclusion, questions are obviously excellent. Those should be questions for everybody. But when we treat applicants differently or, let one applicant, come in t-shirt and shorts, but we make everybody else, come in a suit and tie, for example, that's treating certain applicants differently. So we want to be as consistent and fair as we possibly can. Now, of course, I'm the first to admit there's exceptions to that rule, and again, I don't want to bore you with all those details, but just know the more consistent and fairly we treat applicants, that's really the key. So if I do any test questions in this area, look for inconsistencies with applicants, because that's really the main focus on the employment law aspect. Well, again, those are the 3 main things that I want you to know for Chapter 4. So again, getting into the hiring process, recruitment, a very, very important topic. And again, in the next several chapters, we're going to be taking this a step further from today. So thanks, everyone, and I will see you for Chapter 5 next.